On today's show, the Capitals up 2-0 against a winless team in 2026, and they still lose. If you can't close that game, this season isn't slipping, it's screaming at you.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the past 4 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about 5-on-5 play is sinking this season. Listen, the Capitals got off to a great start. Forget the power play. This team is struggling on 5-on-5. We'll talk about that a bit later in the show. We'll talk about the team is out of answers and time. There was the beat writers covering this team for the longest time said they'll find a way to dig themselves out of this. The fans said, Dan, you're being hard on this team. It's still really early. Those answers have still not come, and it's not as early as it once was. But just to get it going here, talking about a game that the Capitals absolutely had to win. They had to win. They played the worst team in the entire National Hockey League, and they lose the game. And I don't know where to go from here, to be honest with you, that there's not a team on deck, on the schedule, that they're playing ahead to say, yes, they can at least beat this team, because if they cannot beat the worst team in the NHL, what can they do? The Vancouver Canucks had not won a single game in 2026 until the Capitals rolled into Vancouver. This is a new low water mark for this team. We're starting this West Coast trip, this westerly trip, if you will, on the wrong foot as they drop to the Avs, which I think many of us had circled them as losing. But to drop to the lowly Vancouver Canucks, this is ultimately an all-time low. And the Capitals beat themselves again. Listen, this game had all the vibes. It had all the positivity right out of the gate. Dylan Strome scores a power play goal. Just a sweet setup from Wilson and Carlson. Justin Sordoff also scores on the power play. And right there, I'm thinking to myself, well, this game is already off to the right foot, right? That the Capitals power play has struggled. You get 2 power play goals in the first period with a sweet setup from Strome and Ovechkin. And I thought there is a chance. There is a chance. But the Vancouver Canucks are like, we smell blood in the water. We know that Caps team isn't that great. And Brock Besser and Evander Kane score. And it's tied at the end of the first period. And, just reeling, as they got off to such a great start. And oftentimes it's about momentum, right? And the Capitals had the momentum. They had the wind in their sail. And yet they find a way to lose this game. Second period, O'Connor and Hronek score. Third period, Dylan Strome scores, but it's not enough. And the lowly Canucks beat the wounded Washington Capitals. And this was the game that Tom Wilson was back, and we thought that was going to fix the team. And I understand there's a bit of a leg there. It's not going to be just shot straight to the moon right away. And you saw Spencer Carbery doing what he could do. You saw Alex Ovechkin, the great 8, who is a firm fixture on the first line Capitals, has been for years, play on the third line. Definitely troubling times for our favorite team. But the biggest takeaway here is the Capitals did not lose to the Canucks. They handed Vancouver their season back. And what am I saying there? Do I think that the Canucks are going to go on a heater here? I still think there's a pretty good shot about them landing well in the draft at the end of the day, but at least gave them the confidence back that, their team struggling, had not won a game in the 2026 season, and they take advantage of an opportunity and they beat the Capitals. Like I say, I'm running out of things of saying, well, they're going to turn it around and they're going to make good on this game, that this team is struggling in the worst possible way. And Vancouver, like I said, came into this game struggling, an 11-game losing streak, a team that had led for 36 total minutes over their last 10 games. And the Capitals, they spot them confidence. They spot them momentum. They spot them belief. And ultimately, this was the game that a lot of what was wrong with the Canucks was made right. And, it'll be interesting to see how they're able to push that forward. But we're at the point now that, like I say, there's not a team coming up here that I feel like, hey, they can win this game. When you lose to the Canucks, when you lose to the worst game in the NHL, it really shatters your confidence. If my confidence in this team is shattered as a podcast or as a fan of the team, what must the players, what must Spencer Carbery, and what all eyes looking squarely at Chris Patrick are thinking? Because this game starts exactly how you'd script it for a bounce back night, right? That, they took a stumble in Denver, but they found a way to get their way back in Vancouver. 5-on-3 power play, early jump. Dylan Strome scores. Justin Sortive scores 2-0 lead inside 10 minutes. The vibes, as a Capitals fan, were at an all-time high. That, I wasn't feeling great about them having to, win a game against the Canucks. They should have won against the Avalanche, but this is going to be a slam dunk. This is going to be an easy one for the Caps. As it turns out, was not the case again. And all of that momentum that was harnessed, that evaporated in a hurry. And because like I say, when you're watching the game, you're thinking to yourself, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is Capitals hockey back. But here's the issue. This team has no killer instinct, none, that they can put together 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes a night, but they cannot continue with what we saw in the first period, in the early part of the period, throughout the game. And, you take a look at it, the Caps were really great in front of the net for the first half of the first period, and then not so much in the back half. Because when you took a look at the first Strome goal, you saw a look at the Sortive goal, the slick passing, you thought, wow, that those are some plays that are looking really good, and the Capitals seem to be firing on all cylinders. And, that's the hard part, because once the Capitals stopped skating downhill, Vancouver ate them alive on the forecheck. And Tom Wilson even mentioned it as much as two teams that are struggling and a team that's looking for answers. Because Brock Besser, a goal off pressure, a Vander Kane goal off failed exit, a puck deflects off Matt Roy's skate. And that's when, the momentum, the air was drained out of the Capitals' tire. And just like that, 2-0 becomes 2-2. And I was thinking to myself as I was watching it, I spent some of the time listening to it because I was multitasking, that I was thinking to myself, well, it's tied. It shouldn't be this way. 2-0. Is there a chance they're going to lose this game? How am I going to come to all of you talking about the Capitals losing to the worst team in the NHL? And here I am. Spencer Carbery didn't sugarcoat it post-game. He said, quote, "We're making massive mistakes. You just cannot give free goals in this league," unquote. And to a certain extent, this is almost starting to be unfair on Spencer Carbery. Since Chris Patrick does not want to make any changes, I would like to see him behind the podium. He's at the games. He travels with the team. I want to see Chris Patrick outside the locker room and point those questions squarely at him. Why did the Capitals play? Well, should you have done something? We're waiting for the right opportunity. You don't want to give up draft picks. And that's where we're at. This season is over. I hate to tell you, that is where we're at right now. That, unless Chris Patrick does something now between now and the trade deadline, It's over. And I don't understand the master plan. Is it all building for next year and they just don't know how to tell us? Is it all about, setting up for the post Ovechkin era? Because, I talked about, a trade about, Panarin, and some people came back at me with Robertson and what was it, Tuck, these different players. And I'm thinking to myself, well, all of those are nice name players, right? But they're all going to have to cause the Capitals to give up something. And what have we heard Chris Patrick say? We don't want to give up any of our prospects. We don't want to give up any of our draft picks. We don't want to give up any of our future. So there's our answer right there. The Capitals will make little to no trades this season because they're afraid of screwing up the future. And it's not really that ambiguous. He said it, and his actions have speak louder than words. This is where we're at right now. If you want to take a look at the standings, last checked here, the Capitals are in 5th place in the Metropolitan Division outside the playoff picture. 54 points. The Blue Jackets with 51. What if they go on a heater? Then it is truly free falling. And there's no nugget on the future that's making me feel optimistic. Like, well, this is going to happen. The only thing on the horizon is Pierre-Luc Dubois. And if you think that Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to fix all that's wrong with this team, you better think again. And it's the saddest story of all, because this very well could be Alex Ovechkin's final season in the NHL, and it feels squandered to me. It doesn't feel like it is an injustice by Chris Patrick, who truly feels like he is asleep at the wheel. And here's my biggest take. When I'm wrapping it up here in the first segment, these aren't system issues. These are attention to detail issues. That they know the problem. It's the same pitfalls again and again. There is a sign that says bump in the road, and they're not pumping the brakes. They're just going full into it and going, wow, that was a big bump. Who knew? The signs are everywhere. They're choosing to ignore them because this team knows what they're supposed to do. They just don't do it consistently. Like I said, you see 10 minutes, maybe a period. We have not seen a 60-minute effort from this team in the longest time. Again, we're going all the way back to the beginning of December since the last time they won back-to-back games. Forget back-to-back games here. A win in some form would feel really good right now. And when you're a team that needs structure to survive, that is deadly. You can bring in Panarin, you can bring in Robertson, but if your systems are broken, it truly doesn't matter. All right, so coming up here after the break, we talk about 5-on-5 play is sinking this season. How do we turn it around? Straight ahead. There is nothing like being near the ice during the hockey season. The speed, the hits, the atmosphere, it's unmatched. Watching at home is great, but being in the building is a completely different experience. The only thing that used to get in the way was actually getting tickets. Long queues, endless screens, and prices that change at checkout. That's why the Game Time app gives the advantage back to the fan. It's the hack for unlocking amazing NHL tickets and experiences in just one place. I pull up the Game Time app to check out when the Capitals are playing and was surprised to find out how easy it was to find great seats. One of my favorite features is seeing the view from my seat before buying, so I know exactly what I'm getting. I went to a Capitals game and I used Game Time. Why? Because I could see the view from the ice where I'm sitting in the app, and there was no questions, and they made it so easy. I love Game Time, and I know you will too, so take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't done so already, go to lockedoncapitals.supercast.com. You get access to an ad-free version of Locked On Capitals compatible with Apple, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcast, so you can get through the whole podcast on your morning commute commercial-free. There's so much to love. An invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord Discord, which includes a group chat just for listeners of Locked On Capitals. We can all vent and rage about how poorly the Capitals are playing on Discord. Go to lockedoncapitals.supercast.com. There's also a link in the show notes. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment of today's show, for the longest time, if you're an everydayer, part of the Everydayer Club, I know I've spoke to you about the problems with the power play, at times problems with the penalty kill. And now it's not even just that. We saw actually the power play not so bad in the last game, but the 5-on-5 play is sinking this team and ultimately their season. And what can I say about it? Why is that? Well, the injuries, right? And I hate to lean into it. Wilson was out, now back. Sort of was out, now back. PLD is going to be back at some point. And there has been no cohesion, a lack of chemistry that we saw last year that we have not seen this year. And one of the things that Spencer Carbery said in the post-game presser, and I'm guilty of it, is that we need to stop comparing last year's Capitals to this year's Capitals. It's not the same team. And he said, think of it more as the Capitals from 2 seasons ago, where maybe we win the game by 1 or 2 goals. It's not just an all-out shellacking that we saw last year. But the 5-on-5 play, it needs to improve. Because if segment 1 was all about, self-inflicted wounds, this segment is about the bigger problem. The Capitals are flat out bad at 5-on-5 hockey right now. And it's interesting. It's follow the bouncing ball. We're good, we're bad. We're good, we're bad. The power play's good, it's bad. It's good, it's bad. There's no consistency. And I don't care that the power play went 2 for 3. I mean, it's good, right? It struggled. I don't care that Strome had 2 goals and an assist. And I don't care that John Carlson hit 600 assists. Those are all like tertiary facts that aren't a part of the bigger picture. When the puck dropped at even strength, the Vancouver was faster, hungrier, and more decisive. Yes, the team that had not won a game in 2026 was all of those things: faster, hungrier, and more decisive. And when you take a look at the Capitals, they were pretty poor from the start at a 5-on-5 perspective. They completely fell apart under pressure from an objectively horrible team. And that's not hyperbole. I mean, take a look at the box score. Rewatch the game if you didn't get a chance to see it, or watch it again for the first time. And let's walk through the second period. Right? The first period, you got Stromer on the board, sort of scores a goal. But the second period, because honestly, it was brutal. Again, how many times have I come to you guys talking about a brutal performance from the Caps? The Caps kill a 74-second 5-on-3. The crowd wakes up. Momentum should swing, right? The Capitals did a good thing, killing off a 2-man advantage there. Instead, Drew Connor scores off, you guessed it, 4-check pressure. Hronchek jumps into the rush and scores 4-on-4. And that's where we're at. That is where the team struggled, that they could not maintain pressure. Now it's 4-2, and the Capitals are chasing yet again. And we've seen how much this team struggles when they chase. And here's the stat that should make everyone uncomfortable, because it's about stats at the end of the day, right? Wins and losses. Per Money Puck, Logan Thompson has allowed 1.65 goals above expected after 2 periods, while Kevin Laakkonen saved 1.53 above expected at the other end. So what am I saying here? What is Dan trying to say? Let's drill down. Is Thompson blameless? No. Is he the main problem? Absolutely not. That, many times when teams in the NHL struggle, right, it's the goalie. It's the goalie. He's a porous goalie. It's a porous 5-hole. His glove hand, his blocker side is weak, whatever the case. Listen, Thompson is going to be playing for Team Canada. That, I'm not absolving him from guilt, but it doesn't go squarely on his shoulders. One of the biggest things here, the bigger issue is that special teams took a step forward, but 5-on-5, well, that leaves much to be desired. And, that's me putting it mildly. No sustained ozone time, no middle lane drives, and no second chances. And when your top guys aren't generating at even strength, you're living on borrowed time. I just think it's only a matter of time. And I'm not buying into this before people are questioning Spencer Carbery, right? Surprise, surprise. Spencer Carbery, who won the Jack Adams last year, that there's a lot of questions, right? There is a lot of questions. I've talked about subtractions, Radish, Mangiapane, Eller, Alexiev, right? By and large, the pillars of who made this team tick are here, save PLD, who we know is out right now. That I don't think it's right. I love what Spencer Carbery means to this team, but at what point are the talking heads, are the ones that talk about the game, are they starting to question Spencer Carbery? I don't want to go down that road. I think that he has done what he can do. He's doing the best with the tools that he has in his tool belt at the end of the day. And I hate to harp on him. All of this goes right back to Chris Patrick and his inability to do anything, not a small move, to do anything. And at the end of the day, I don't want, the blame to go on this or that. And I understand that Patrick can't put the skates on. We know the team is not winning. And at some point, you got to think that Ted Leonsis is going to talk to Brian McClellan, who's still, of course, involved in the upper end of the organization, and Chris Patrick, and going, listen, I know who your dad is, but what are you doing here? What is your plan to succeed? Or is it, like I said, the master plan that this team has already lost? And we don't want to give up a whole lot, because if we're, as a matter of fact, out of it, then why waste prospects? Why waste draft picks? I think to a certain extent that Chris Patrick, I think to a certain extent that the ownership is resigned to the fact that this team isn't it, if you know what I mean. And they're not. We have not seen that. There was a glimpse where they were really good for, 3-4 weeks, and they were on top of the Metro. Well, that ship has sailed. We can't even talk about that anymore, because the present state of the Capitals is quite horrible. And unless they do something, we're going to be talking about the season that was. All right, so coming up here after the break, we're talking about the Capitals as they are running out of time. This team is out of answers and time. What do they do? I'll discuss next. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube, like the videos, and comment anything down below. You can also find us on TikTok. It's at Locked On Capitals. You can also find us on Instagram, Locked On Capitals, socials, everywhere. Check them out. All right, in this final segment, I'm really tired. I'm tired of coming to you guys on a daily basis. First of all, I love talking to you guys about the Capitals, but this is uncharted territory for me. That as long as I've hosted this show, I haven't had to talk about this team negatively in such a long stretch for a long time. And I got to say, it's a bit difficult. I don't like to be the guy that is walking into the room and going, hey, did you hear what the bad news is that happened? In a lot of ways, I try to insert some positive, but I'm really digging deep. Hershey's not playing well. You take a look at the team right now, big picture, they're not playing well. And the thing that I fear is that they're running out of time and they're running out of answers. That, Chris Patrick, as long as he has been here, has done nothing. The only feathers in his hat is Justin Sordiff, really. I mean, Declan Chisholm is what he is. He's an extra defender. And he has done nothing to put his stamp on this team to say, that's what I'm capable of. And that's what you would expect out of a GM and his long family legacy of doing great things in hockey, that a guy that is just like, I don't know what to tell you. They're going to turn it around. I don't want to give up draft picks. I don't want to give up these players on this team. You like these players, right? I like them. So this is where we're at. They're probably going to figure it out. probably going to figure it out. And I understand that was some creative takes on me on what Chris Patrick is thinking, but that's what it feels like to me as a fan. And maybe you feel like it at home. And it's interesting. I've heard from Avs fans. I've heard from Canucks fans, and they're like, Dan, you know, it's not as bad as it looks. It is. It is as bad as it looks, and the standings indicate that. So let's talk about it. In the final segment of today's show is that the Capitals are running out of answers and, well, time. Because everyone gather around the speaker, gather around your computer, your phone, wherever. This is the uncomfortable truth. This felt like a measuring stick, and the Capitals failed. Right? They failed. This was the game. The Canucks game was the game they were supposed to win. Forget about the Avs game. I mean, I don't think anyone thought they were going to win that game. That would have been nice, but yeah, come on. I don't live in those kind of realms. You know, because on paper, Tom Wilson comes back. The opponent is reeling. The standings are slipping away. Is Tom Wilson, number 43, your future captain, going to be the one to fix it? And, you know, you get these interesting comments. Patrick Weller talking to Al Colkin, and he said that the third period was the most important moment of the season. And did it look like that? Did it look like the most important moment until they pulled the goalie? Not really. You know, Strome scores late on the 6-on-5. Yes, they make it interesting, but interesting, yeah, you can't cash that in. You know, you take a look at the standings, like, hey, they tried hard in the third. That gets us a point or half a point or something. Nope, nothing. Absolutely nothing. But urgency just can't show up when you're desperate, right? And you know, you hear the lip service, you know, Dylan Strome in the post-game presser says, we need to be better. Tom Wilson says, this wasn't our game. You know, I get all that. Stop it. I understand it. I want some accountability. I want some Niskanen, if you guys remember, who was most honest about, you know, we were poor. This is why we were poor. This is how we plan to clean it up. Not just these PR statements that you see out there. Because let's talk big picture right now. Wilson is back. Great. Carlson hit 600 assists. Yeah, high five, everyone. Strome looks legit. But here's the scary stat. The Capitals are 14th out of 16 teams in the Eastern Conference in point percentage. That's not tanking territory. That's not going to get you the first pick in the draft. That's purgatory. And this is where the Artemi Panarin rumors come in. This is where the Robertson things, all of them come in, talking about it. One Artemi Panarin, one Robertson does not fix this team. Tom Wilson didn't fix it. I know people think that Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to fix this team. Not unless, talking about Panarin, these kind of guys, unless he signs an extension. Multiple roster issues are addressed. The 5-on-5 play continues. That sign me up. I think Artemi Panarin, and he's a polarizing guy. I've heard from a lot of you saying, no, Dan, we don't want Panarin on here. We don't want Panarin to this team. And I get that. But he would give a jump to this team because otherwise you're slapping a Band-Aid on a structural crack. The Capitals don't need hope. We don't need good vibes. We don't need beat writers saying they're really nice guys and they give nice interviews. Enough with the puppy love. I want to get real. I want to get brass tacks. I want to talk about how this team is getting better. And I understand that there's an obligation that when you cover the team, you don't want to ruffle feathers. I don't care about any of that. I care about the Capitals winning games. The final season of Ovechkin in the National Hockey League, and we're running out of time. Because right now, they're a team that can start strong. We saw that in Vancouver, but they cannot sustain pressure and folds when the momentum turns. It is that turtle that recedes into its shell that we saw from the Capitals of old. And that's why we're in the position that we're in, right? It's a tough position. And they're running out of time. That, you know, the Olympic break was one of the markers. And of course, the trade deadline in early March, that is another marker. But there's nothing in the air. There's no hunch. There's no premonition that there is something around the corner that Chris Patrick is going to pull a rabbit out of his hat. He pulled his hat off, and guess what? No rabbit, just a smelly Capital season. Now here, I don't want to dunk on the team. They're still my favorite team, always will be. But they've let me down, right? It's like your parents say, I'm not mad at you, but you let me down. You disappointed me. That's where I'm at. The players, the coaches are there. They're just not executing. We need to see better. And I want to say it's the next game, but is there anything that lends me to believe it is? They lost to the freaking Canucks, right? All we can do is hope they can turn it around and that hopefully better days are ahead. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You, as a matter of fact, are what makes this show successful. And for all of you everydayers, the Everydayer Club that listen to this, I have got something just for you. It's not just a title anymore. There's a club for us called the Everydayer Club. For all of you that are super into the Capitals and Locked On Capitals, go over to lockedoncapitals.supercast.com. You get an ad-free version of the show. You get access to the members-only Discord, which includes access to the Locked On Capitals Discord. So check it out. This is where we're all going to vent on about our team and how it needs to be better, right? All right. For those of you on the video side, we send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel on audio. Make sure and make your second listen NHL game night on Locked On NHL. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.